I say somewhat similar because, as I recall, you were presiding over sanctions when Russia did their last invasion of Ukraine involving Crimea and Donbass.
Good to be with you, David. That's correct. I was responsible for the sanctions program back in 2014, 2015, and have followed very closely the development of the plans this time and the implementation of them, which I think have really been extraordinarily well designed and are doing what sanctions are supposed to do.
We've gone further, as I understand it, this time than last time. Do you have any regrets at all? Do you think we should have gone further last time? Maybe it would have discouraged Russia this time?
So I think that the situation is different, and the sanctions response and the response in terms of military support are different. And I think it's also the case that we know an awful lot more now than we did in 2014-15 in terms of what the connections are between Russia's economy, its financial system, Europe, and the rest of the world. Remember, in 2014-15, we were at the end of the recovery from the great financial crisis. There was a legitimate and real concern that we not throw the U.S., Europe, and the global economy into a tailspin. And it was the first time we had ever put sanctions on a major global economy like Russia's. I think what we did in 2014-15 kind of set the rules for how a well-designed sanction program works. And I think this administration has advanced them because they've been responding to a rapidly escalating series of aggressive acts by Russia. And I'm happy to go into detail about the principles, but what they did in the first weeks was take very significant initial steps. When the attacks escalated, they quickly grew the sanctions program to include much more of the economy, including the central bank of Russia. And I think now, as the war is settling in a very troubling way, they're looking at how to use sanctions to do as much as they can to cripple Russia's capacity to continue to rearm itself. So I think the sanctions are being used extremely well. I think they were used effectively in 2014-15. The thing about sanctions is that they don't automatically change an outcome. They can make it harder for a country to pay for its war. They can put burdens on the economy and the people of the country. But ultimately, it has to come together with diplomacy and the failure on the military battlefield for the leader of that country to change course, for the sovereign to change its policy.
Right.
I don't know that we're on the verge of that happening, but I think sanctions are doing what they can do.
Secretary Lew, one of the things you have said and others have said is essential in sanctions is that it be multilateral, that we get a lot of people together with us. A couple of the key players here could be China and India. We heard your successor, Janet Yellen, the current Secretary of Treasury, a couple of weeks ago say China really has to choose sides. What can the United States do without injuring ourselves to make sure China does get and stay on our side, so to speak, as well as India?
David, I think it's important to start by focusing who is working together now. You have more than half of the global economy working together to put economic pressure on Russia. It is the most important part of the world in terms of Russian trade and commerce. And it's why we can go as far as we can go without there being a backlash against the United States. So I'd start by saying there's enormous cooperation. When it comes to Russia, China and India have different relations with Russia than we do. I think it's important to note that China is observing our sanctions. They are very skillful at understanding where the boundaries are between what is permitted and what's not permitted. And it, from the outside, certainly looks as if they've decided they don't want to cross the line and violate our sanctions. Do I wish that China would do more to stand up clearly behind the international law that protects sovereignty? Yes, I do. Do I wish that China would put pressure on Russia that it has the capacity to do, that very few countries have the capacity to do? Yes, I wish they would. But I don't think they're taking the position of opposing our sanctions through their actions. Now, I think that we have to be careful how we traverse the space now as we put more and more pressure on the international community to work with us. We are keeping, as I said, more than half of the world's economy with us. We need to make sure we keep doing that. And we shouldn't allow schisms to be created between us and our allies in Europe, in Japan, in Australia, in Canada, in most of the democratic world. So I think if it is not the case that it's in China's interest to lose contact with all of the countries that are putting the sanctions in place. And I think we have to keep putting diplomatic pressure bilaterally and multilaterally for China to do more.